All right. I'm here to read Chapter 11 in Treasure of Pelican Cove. Peg Leg's Treasure. Jimmy knelt beside the broken pieces of wood. Whatever they had been a part of, it had rotted away. Jimmy tugged in the sand beside the pieces. His fingers touched something solid. He pulled it up. It was an old iron hinge. Excitement swept through Jimmy. "This is it!" He yelled, "Blackie! This is it!" Hurriedly, he dug some more. Sand scattered under his probing fingers. He dug up an iron clasp and another hinge before his fingers closed on something round. Jimmy pulled it up and shook off the sand. It was another clay ball. Before Jimmy could open it, a dark shadow fell across the sand. Jimmy looked up. The stringy-haired man stood at the edge of the ditch. His eyes glittered. "So you found it!" The words were quiet, but they sent a chill down Jimmy's spine. He looked around for Blackie. Slowly, he began to back away from the remains of Peg Leg's chest. "How did you find me?" he asked. Bill grinned unpleasantly. "There's a great view from the top of the Ferris wheel," he answered. "But I don't need you anymore. Just move away from the treasure." Jimmy backed up to the other edge of the ditch. The man scrambled down. He fell to his knees and dug frantically in the sand. He was so intent on digging that he didn't hear the sirens. Jimmy backed farther away. When he reached the edge of the trees, he saw people running. They were running toward him. He stood still and waited, clutching the ball behind him. He heard Bill give a wild cry of disappointment. "Oh, there's nothing here," he said. "Nothing at all." The policeman reached the ditch, guns drawn. Jimmy stared across at them, wide-eyed. Granny and Hiram caught up with the policeman and ran across the ditch to Jimmy. The other men and women from the amusement park stopped and stared at the man in the ditch. Someone said, "Treasure?" and excitement crackled in the air. Granny held Jimmy close. They watched as the people surged past the line of policemen and began to dig in the sandy ditch. One policeman led Bill away. The others watched the diggers shaking their heads. "So that's it, Jimmy," Hiram said. "Nothing left at all." Slowly, Jimmy held out his hand. There was one. Granny took it gingerly. "We'll check it later. We'd better get home soon." "We'd better get home now, son." Blackie came scampering back. His tongue was hanging out and his eyes were sparkling. He jumped up on Jimmy. "Huh?" Jimmy said. He hugged the dog. "Just where were you when I needed you?" They made their way across the ditch and through the trees. Before Jimmy reached the boardwalk, he looked back at the trees. The squirrels ran back and forth in the trees, scolding the diggers below them. Jimmy grinned. "Taking good care of Peg Leg's treasure," he whispered. Paul and Elizabeth Ann were waiting on the porch. They ran to meet the small group that straggled up the path. "Jimmy, are you all right?" Elizabeth Ann hovered over him. He waved her away and scrubbed the cheek she had kissed. "Don't smother me." "Sure, I'm okay." Paul grinned. Elizabeth Ann did tend to mother a person. He walked along by Jimmy. "So, you found it," he said. There really was a peg leg?" "Reckon so," Jimmy said. He had developed a swagger. "Me and Hiram knew it all along." Hiram grinned. He straightened his old slouch hat and strutted beside Jimmy. "You bet," he said. Even Jimmy laughed. They went back into the house in a good mood. They gathered around the kitchen table. Granny took out the clay ball. She used a kitchen mallet to crack it gently. The clay crumbled away and a ruby gleamed on the polished tabletop. Hiram held it up to the light. "A pigeon ruby." "A what?" Jimmy said. "A pigeon ruby," Hiram repeated. "A big ruby. It's worth a lot of money." "We'll take it down to the museum tomorrow," Granny said. "I'm just glad it's over. Those diggers and their holes will be gone forever." "When do we get the money?" Elizabeth Ann asked. "I want to go shopping." "You don't," Granny said, smiling. "You children are minors. The money goes to your parents." The children looked at her dismayed. "Don't worry," Granny said hastily. "I'm sure it will go into your college fund." "But where did the rest of the treasure go?" Elizabeth Ann asked at last. "What could have happened to it?" "Yeah," Paul said. "It had to go somewhere." Jimmy didn't say anything. He fidgeted. "Maybe people picked up over the years and never said anything," Hiram guessed. "Or maybe old Pegleg took it back. Maybe the 2 stones got overlooked." Jimmy opened his mouth, then he shut it again. "Or maybe they got scattered and buried when the ditch was dug," Granny suggested. "If so, we'll soon know. That crew of people were really digging by the time we left." "The squirrels have it," Jimmy said in a small voice. "I know," Elizabeth Ann said. "A hurricane washed them away. Maybe they are lying out on the beach, just scattered by the water." "The squirrels have it," Jimmy said more loudly. There was silence at the table. All eyes turned to Jimmy. "What?" Hiram said. "I said the squirrels have the clay balls," Jimmy said. "They look like nuts, you know." Hiram's eyes went round. "You mean it?" He began to laugh. Elizabeth Ann giggled. Granny sputtered, and then she too began to laugh. Paul just kept on staring. "You mean in all those trees there are hordes of rubies?" "And diamonds," Elizabeth Ann gasped. "And emeralds," Granny said, wiping her eyes. "Well, that's a squirrely idea if I ever heard one," Paul said indignantly. He frowned when everyone burst into laughter again. "Listen, everybody, that means there's still a fortune out there. All we have to do is go get it," he pleaded. "I don't want to." Jimmy's blunt statement brought silence back to the table. He looked at the others sadly. "I wasn't going to tell you at all. I don't want Pegleg's treasure anymore. I want our beach back." "I agree with Jimmy. The holes can be filled," Granny said. "But if the search goes on, the trees will be chopped down in order to find the jewels." "You mean if we tell about the squirrels?" Elizabeth Ann said. "People will do the same to the trees that they did to our beach. And besides, what would happen to the squirrels?" "People act funny when they are hunting treasure," Jimmy said, shivering. "They'd probably shoot them." And somebody might take Blackie again. Blackie's more important than any pirate's treasure. Granny and Hiram smiled at each other. Hiram coughed. Well, he said, I've had my fill of treasure hunters. A body can't even go shelling without a gaggle of gold hunters breathing down his neck. What about you, Paul? Paul looked from one to another. His eyes stopped on the ruby. I think the fun was in the chase, he said slowly. The hunt. Now we know where the treasure is. I'd just as soon leave it there. Granny's smile grew. Am I to understand that you don't want to collect the jewels? The other four looked at each other. Solemnly, each one held out his hand. They did a 4-hand shake. They spoke at the same time. Let the squirrels have it. And that's just what they did.